Today we're gonna make a hearty chili. Now this stuff is full of meat, it has beans, it has corn, it has tomatoes, it has fantastic flavor. And this stuff is so hearty that at one time it broke a plastic ladle. And the best thing about this chili is that it's super easy to make. You can make it with a lot of stuff that you can very easily get in your pantry. Let's take a look. Alright, now to make this chili, you're going to need mostly canned ingredients. So you are going to need different kinds of beans, starting with 1 can of red kidney beans. They can be light or dark. 1 can of pinto beans. 1 can of black beans. 1 can of rotel tomatoes. A can, or you could use fresh or frozen. Corn, doesn't really matter which kind. And then 1 can of tomato sauce. In addition to those things, you're also going to need, of course, some fresh ingredients. You're going to be using 1 green bell pepper, 1 red bell pepper, 1 whole yellow onion, and I like using quite a lot, so there will be a good amount here. And then you're going to need a pound of ground beef, which I have some from the half a cow I bought last year, and a pound of sausage. I like using breakfast sausage. This is technically not actually breakfast sausage, but you can use whatever kind you like. Doesn't really matter. I'm actually going to be making a double batch today, but these are the base ingredients I need for that. Then for spices, you're going to need either some beef bouillon to make beef broth, or just get some beef broth. Either way will work just fine. You're going to need lots of chili powder, for sure. You're going to need some ground cumin. You're also going to need some garlic powder. You can use fresh garlic if you prefer. When it comes to putting all this stuff together, I prefer the fresh. And then this is something that is probably not that traditional, but it works well as part of the recipe, and that's a little bit of cocoa powder. I have specifically cacao powder, which is I don't really know what the best way to put it. Probably a little higher in fiber, something like that. But either way, it's an extra little ingredient that I add. It's not a lot of it, but you do add some of it. So now that we have all of our ingredients together, we'll get our veggies chopped up, and then we'll start getting the chili put together. Hi, Future Guy here. One thing I forgot to mention with the chili is that basically when you are making a normal size batch, you're using actually about half as much. So you're using half of a yellow onion, half of a green bell pepper, and half of a red bell pepper. Since I'm making a double size batch this time, I use a full 1 of each. Back to the video. Alright, so for this recipe, I'm going to be cooking the entire thing in my Instant Pot. I'm doing double the recipe, so the amounts here I'm going to show you are twice the amount that you actually need for just a single size recipe. But I'm going to start off with 2 pounds of pork sausage and 2 pounds of ground beef. If you're making a single batch, you just half that, so 1 pound of each. And the reason we're starting with cooking the meat before we cook any of the veggies is because we can use some of the fat from the meat in order to get those veggies sauteed rather than having to use separate fat from oil or beef fat or bacon fat or whatever you normally would use. So basically just going to saute that until it gets browned properly, And when that's done, we'll go ahead and start adding other things to it. All right, now that our meat is sufficiently browned, we're going to go ahead and pull it out off to the side, and then we can cook up our onions and our peppers. All right, so you should just have maybe a little bit of the fat left from the meat. But at this point, we're going to go ahead and just toss onions and peppers in there. Once again, if you're making a regular sized batch, you're using half an onion, half a green pepper, and half a red bell pepper. In this case, I'm making a double batch, so I'm using a whole of each. So we're going to get that sauteed a bit so that everything gets softened and reduced down to a bit of a smaller size so that it is easier to go from there. In this case, I'm going to add a little bit of that fat back to it. All right, so now our onions and peppers are pretty well softened, not caramelized or anything. You can go that far if you want to, but personally, I typically leave it right around here. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and add our meat back to it. If you still have some fat left in there, you can add it in if you want, or you can drain it out. A lot of times with everything else in there, the fat really just adds some more flavor. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to get all of that, the meat and the peppers and the onions all mixed well together. And this is when we're going to start adding our spices. Now, one of the reasons why we're using the pork sausage to go along with this is because it adds some salt to it already, in addition to some more fat to give it a little more flavor, and really just to help everything expand a bit more. And you're not going to want to add any real salt at this point, but you are going to start adding your other spices. So the first thing I'm going to add is some garlic powder. I'm going to do roughly about 1 to 2 tablespoons per for each batch. Since I'm doing 2 batches, I'm going to do 2 tablespoons per batch. I like plenty of garlic flavor in mine. And I'm just guesstimating, but this should be roughly about 4 tablespoons altogether. Then we're going to add some cumin, and this is one of those things you got to be really careful not to add too much. I'm actually going to add, say, about 1 teaspoon per batch, because you really don't need very much, but it does add some important flavors. And my container's getting pretty low here, but I should still be able to get what I need out of this. So, it's roughly 1, and 2 teaspoons. And like I said, don't overdo the cumin. That is one of those things that can completely ruin the flavor of everything, because it makes it a little too bitter if you add too much. So the next thing you're going to want to add is chili powder. Now this is where you can be a lot more generous, and really I oftentimes end up adding more to taste. So for a normal size batch, I say start with about 3 tablespoons. For a double sized batch like I'm doing, I'm going to do about 6 tablespoons. That right there is about 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to start with that. And then we're going to add roughly about 1 tablespoon of black pepper for each batch, so 2 tablespoons for this double-sized batch. A little bit of black pepper can go a long way. If you like it really spicy, you can obviously make it spicier than that, but that's about how much I add. And I almost forgot, also adding some cocoa powder. I'm going to do about 1 tablespoon for this entire batch. Really don't need very much. We'll taste it later, see how it is, whether or not we need to add more. Honestly, most of these things I kind of just guesstimate. So we're gonna get all this mixed up, and that way we can find out for sure if our taste is where it needs to be. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that it's not going to be as salty as it will be later, because later on you're going to be adding in beef broth and additional bouillon as needed. That will increase the salt factor, and that's where you're going to get most of your salt in reality. It's already looking beautiful. Now let's just give it a quick taste. It's got a good flavor, but it's definitely going to need some more chili powder. So I'm going to go ahead and add basically another 3 tablespoons worth. A lot of this is really just going to be to taste. So it's going to be kind of a personal basis, but using this set of ingredients and using these methods is going to get you a really, really delicious chili. It's going to be super hearty, and it's going to go really far. And the great thing about this chili is that it's also great for the freezer. You can freeze a bunch of this stuff and have multiple batches available for future meals, whether you're having chili by itself, having chili dogs, chili with cornbread. I mean, there's just a ton of different possibilities of things you can do with it. But we'll give it one more quick taste. And that seems to be about right. You get kind of like a light spice, kind of a smoky flavor. Not real salty, but it's going to be a lot more salty once you start adding the other ingredients. So now we're gonna go ahead and add in the beans. All right, so here I have 2 cans each of black beans, pinto beans, and kidney beans, all drained and rinsed. And once again, if you are doing a normal size batch, you're just doing 1 can of each. I'm doing a double batch, so I'm doing 2. You want to get all these mixed well together. We'll be adding the tomatoes and tomato sauce and the corn later on. You see, this stuff is really hearty, so it actually takes quite a bit of effort to get it stirred, but it's going to be really, really good when it's all said and done. The next thing we're going to add is our beef broth and tomato sauce. All right, so first we're going to start off by adding our broth. Do about 2 cups per batch of beef broth. I'm doing 4 cups because I'm doing a double batch. So go pretty far, but it's going to reduce quite a bit as it cooks. Get that stirred in properly. And then we're going to add 1 can of tomato sauce per batch. So we're adding 2 this time. And 1 can of Rotel tomatoes per batch as well. Get that all well mixed together. And one of the things to note about this is that this is quite full because it's a big fat batch. But this is the point when you're going to want to make sure you get your flavors sorted out. So once everything is well incorporated, we're not even going to add the corn yet because that really gets added towards the end, since it doesn't, at least when you're using the canned corn, it doesn't take much to get cooked. But this is the point when you're going to want to go ahead and give it a taste test. So tasting that now, it definitely needs some more seasoning, but that's one of the reasons why we do all this before we finalize everything. So we're going to go ahead and add some more beef bouillon to the mix. That's going to be one of the main things that's really going to bring this flavor together. Now I recommend, depending on your preference for salt, start with 1 tablespoon additionally at a time. I'm doing 2 because I know that it's going to need a bit more for my taste and to really get it just right. Get all that well incorporated. Get a good idea of where we're at with the flavor before we add any more spices. Because the salt is one thing that once you add it in, you can't take it out. The only thing you can do is add more to it to offset the saltiness a bit, and in this case, I think we should be just about right. I think it needs a touch more of that beef bouillon. I'm going to do roughly about 2 more tablespoons. I know it might seem like this is a lot, but considering how huge this batch is, it really does need more. But I make a lot so that I can freeze a bunch, have plenty available for later meals, and a little goes a really long way. And the thing is that although this is a pretty easy recipe to make, it still takes time. And if you're going to put that much time and effort into it, you might as well make a lot and have plenty to hold over for future meals. Alright, so now it should be about right on the saltiness level. We'll just give it one more quick taste. And yep, that's a perfect saltiness level. We'll add a little more chili powder just to flesh it out a bit more. Basically another 2 tablespoons. And then we'll get that all incorporated. Main thing with chili is that you really just gotta taste it as you go. Make sure that all the flavors are exactly how you want them to be, because if you're gonna be making a bunch of it, you're gonna be eating a bunch of it, you wanna make sure that it's something that you enjoy. Don't worry about other people's taste as much as your own. And that's it. That is the flavor that it needs to be. Now we're gonna set this on the bean chili setting on the Instant Pot. Otherwise you can bring it up to a boil, and then when it gets up to a boil, turn it down to simmer and let it simmer uncovered for about 30 minutes, give or take. Basically you just wanna keep an eye on it until it gets to the thickness that you want. I like my chili nice and thick, and even though of course with all the stuff in here, it's pretty thick, those beans cooking down will make it even thicker. So we'll just let that go and do its thing. Hi, Future Guy here. I ended up adding a little more to it because I just felt like it kind of needed a little more, so I added some more beef bouillon, about a couple more tablespoons worth. I added 2 more tablespoons of the cocoa powder, or cacao powder in this case, and then about half a teaspoon of ground cumin. And that seems to be basically the right balance on everything. Yeah, but once again, like I always say, make sure that you taste as you go. That's the best way to make sure that it's going to be how you want it. And you can add whatever else you need to add. Let's continue. Alright, so the chili's starting to thicken pretty well. It's been going roughly about 15 minutes or so. When you start to feel more resistance as you stir, that's when you'll know that it's thickening up nicely. At this point, we're going to go ahead and add in the corn. And really, you can technically add it at any time. I like to add it about halfway through cooking. That way it adds to the flavor, but also doesn't interfere too much with the thickening process. Now, normally I actually would add 2 cans of corn for this big of a batch. I actually only have 1, so that's what I'm adding this time. But either way, it's going to be really good. So now we'll let it simmer some more, give it at least 15 more minutes, or until it gets to a thickness that meets our satisfaction. All right, now the chili's had roughly about half an hour, 45 minutes of cooking time. Honestly, I kind of lost track of how long it's been cooking, but It's thickened up really nicely. So now we'll serve some up and then we'll do a taste test. And now the taste test.
Nice meatiness, spices, really good chili.
I mean, look at that. It's got lots of meat, plenty of beans, corn, peppers, tomatoes. It's just got everything. Everything you could want in chili. I'm not burning my mouth like you did. The depth of flavors. I can't even explain it, but I'm telling you, make this chili. This stuff is super hearty. It's filling for the amount per serving. It's fantastic. Thanks for checking it out. And now the taste test. Hot.
Don't do that take.